Welcome to this week's episode of Leaders on a Mission, where I'm joined by inspiring leaders driven by the impact of creating a healthy and sustainable world. Now, in today's episode, I'm joined by Todd Rands, CEO of L.O.A.M Life Systems, who are a mission-driven next-generation ingredients company. So what they do, they take rare and difficult to commercialize compounds, and they find a way of creating, I suppose, healthy and sustainable ingredients. And Todd, it's thank you so much for giving up your time. It's great to have you on the show today. I know you're a busy man.
Simon, thank you. It was a tremendous introduction and sort of humbling, as it makes me sound way more important than I feel.
Great. Look, Todd, tell me, let's take it all the way back. I'm really interested in, I suppose, understanding, I suppose some of the key forces in your career that have really helped shape who you are today.
Sure, Simon, I'll just kind of lay down here on the therapist's couch and start telling you about my mother. So let me get comfortable and let me see where this takes us. Yeah, actually it does. It really, I've been very lucky in my life to have a background of parents that were just fascinated by science. My father was an electrical engineer building probes that explored the universe back in the 70s and had this fascination with all things up in the stars that led him to a career in electrical engineering to build satellites and other things. And he surrounded me with science constantly in my childhood. And my mom was an artist. And what we do in science is so much of that blend between the engineering and the art. And so I just grew up in this household where those influences were all around me all the time. And I developed a real love for science at an early age. And I remember asking my dad once, why are we spending all these public dollars on sending probes to faraway places? Why is that relevant and why does it matter? And he pointed at this giant box under his desk, which back then was a computer. Today, they're a lot smaller, but he said everything in that box came from our effort to do something audacious and impossible as we're exploring planets in the distant parts of our galaxy. We learn from the journey and we take all that technology and all the learnings and start finding real world applications for it. And it had a profound effect on me in terms of the potential of what we can do with science. I turned my gaze more earthbound and started looking inside of cells, and I became fascinated with what's going on inside of a cell and how does it work and what happens when things go wrong and you get cancer. And actually kind of the miracle to me is that it ever works right in the first place. When you start understanding just how complex all this is, the question for me is why doesn't it go wrong more often? And so all of that early upbringing around science and that balance of the artistry of it with my mother taught me to really seek a career in science and what we can do with science in our lives to solve problems.
Yeah. But, there's many different ways one can go and build a career in science. But from an entrepreneur business viewpoint, where did you find your love and passion from the, the business perspective as well?
Yeah, that came from, there's some practical realities to that, but I always wanted to find solutions. So I loved science. And at an early part of my career, I dedicated myself to labs and studies and research, and then quickly got frustrated because of the style of the R&D. I wanted to be out there creating real world applications, finding products that could actually change people's lives using the basic research. And so I moved on from basic research to other kinds of business opportunities over my career where I could take the science off the bench, get it out in a field or into another product that people could actually use. And that's what excited me about the business part of this. There was also a practical side. I had 6 kids when I was in a lab raising a family, and I needed to find other ways to make a living. So there was some financial need there as well that drove me to pursue other entrepreneurial and business opportunities at an early point.
Right. Yeah, absolutely.
And that's a big influence too, because if you've got kids, they keep you pretty humble. They don't let you develop a big head, and it just is always a good grounding of what really matters and what perspectives that you need to keep in life. And so I've always found that my family is a rich source of that, being the ultimate coach for me as I develop a career.
Yeah, no, amazing. And I would have thought those 6 kids on the one hand, it keeps you, there's probably a lack of freedom when it comes to, thinking about the entrepreneur, trying new things, taking risks. With 6 kids and mouths to feed, it must make that more difficult, because it's interesting looking at your career, because you've had 2 paths, right? You've been the corporate at Monsanto for a number of years, and then post Monsanto, lots of entrepreneurial opportunities. I'm wondering if that dovetails with kids growing up and maybe some of the financial needs of providing for your family kind of evolving, as it were.
Yeah, it is a rich career of different kinds of experiences. I always, some people would say I get bored easily, that I'm just constantly seeking out some new frontier to explore and learn. And that's a big part of my career. But ultimately, I've enjoyed the broader range. We talk about specialists and experts in all the discipline of developing that expertise. And you have, Malcolm Gladwell out there talking about what it takes to truly be excellent at one thing. And then I've seen more talk now about the range and the breadth of our experiences really lending itself to problem solving and the kinds of issues that we're dealing with in the world, where you can tap lots of different perspectives from the things you've done over a career. So I started as a scientist. I went into patent law. Some people would say I sold out and went into law. And then after a lot of therapy, I got out of law and started to get more into business and entrepreneurial pursuits. And along the way, I learned to be a farmer. I got into agriculture, was always in the middle of deal making. I worked with regulators around the world. I worked with government affairs teams around the world, driving opportunities in different countries, and with venture capital as well, with investments and new entrepreneurial opportunities. So it gave me this real broad reach of experiences that I could go to when I'm solving a problem. And it lends itself to the venture world, where you show up and you have to wear a lot of different hats. Some days you're putting furniture together, some days you're raising $100 million, and you do almost everything in between. You need a team of people around you that have that same kind of range and can flex in lots of different directions.
Great. It sounds like lots of breadth, lots of different functions that you've worked across, and it sounds like the experience at Monsanto would have really paved the way and given you lots of skills and opportunities to, I suppose, take all that learning into the world of entrepreneurship.
Yeah, Monsanto was a tremendous incubator for entrepreneurial talent. And if you look around the industry in the ag tech space and in the food space, you will find Monsanto people everywhere doing amazing things.
Yeah,
the company was tremendous at moving people around, making sure that you were always being challenged, finding new opportunities, whether you were a scientist or a commercial person, moving you into new functions where you could explore and continue to grow and learn, and really developing those strong skills across their whole teams so that everyone could fit and do different things. And they were also excellent at moving products from the bench to the field. And so I learned a lot from experts there, how to really drive efficiency in product development so that you're not just doing science for science purposes, but rather turning it into those practical applications and products. So really, I've spent my whole career just trying to keep up with people smarter than me. And Monsanto, I was surrounded by professors. I mean, just everywhere I turned was somebody who was way more knowledgeable and an expert in what they were doing. And I was just constantly learning. And it was the kind of thing I try to do my whole career.
Oh, fantastic. And tell me, how different do you think you are as a CEO of L.O.A.M, right? You had a couple of gigs after Monsanto, I think as founder and as CEO. How valuable do you think that experience and expertise was? How different, if you were moving straight from Monsanto to this job now, without those intervening roles, how different would that have been?
Yeah, it's an amazing difference to be the CEO of a company. Your whole focus changes. That wealth of experience is still there, but now I need to completely change how I'm focusing my time and energy. And so it is a big shift to go from working in a big company to being in a startup, and also the role being so different. It takes a different mentality. You don't have the resources. you typically have, obviously, in a startup that you would have at a bigger company. You need different skill sets in your team. And we struggle sometimes to find the right fit and talent out there that's going to work well in a startup environment versus the kind of skill sets you need to be good managers in a larger company. And then for me personally, it was a huge growth process for me as well. In a big company, you're always kind of working and trying to move up towards, more senior responsibilities. You're ambitious, you're moving fast, you've got a lot of skills, but, over time, I've started to find balance and perspective in a different place. And as a CEO, it brings a much more nuanced approach to how I work and what I'm putting my time and energy on. But it's building trust. It's a lot more focused on relationships now. And how am I spending my time with the people around me and having presence, truly being there when someone's with me. I'm not off somewhere else in my mind, and just getting to that place where I have the right balance between what I'm doing at work and what I'm doing for others and for myself. And I wish I had discovered that a lot earlier in my career. I think I look back at all the things I did over the years, and I was constantly seeking to move and to get to higher levels and things. And now I just feel content and appreciative and enjoying the steps of the journey more than I ever have.
Yeah, no, that's great. Absolutely. Really interesting insights. It's great to have had both sides, experience on both sides. Because I don't, do you need to have that big corporate experience and the breadth and the richness that comes with it to then bring to a startup world as well, rather than really being in startup worlds?
It's a really great question, because you see people doing both. And when I look at startups where they're just being, they don't have the experience and the grounding of what the industry has done in the past, they have permission to be audacious and challenge assumptions or not even realize that there's boundaries. And that's tremendous. And that's where we see some of the biggest breakthroughs. But I can also see where those same entrepreneurs struggle because they lack some of that context. And so I think it's a balance. You need to have some of that grounding, but not so grounded that you see four walls around you, that you can see paths to new frontiers and horizons that maybe the big company isn't nimble enough or risky enough to go after. And now in a startup, you can go chase that. And that's what I always loved when I was in the big companies. I got to work with a lot of startups with our venture team. And it always impressed me how they were going after the big problems and moving fast. And they weren't afraid. They were just, I'm going to go to Mars. I'm going to create robots that can plant seeds and spray herbicides in a fraction of the amounts that we use today. And it was the crazy ideas. And then you would actually see their prototypes and start to see them making this progress and realize that when you dare to dream, you can actually achieve some amazing things. And so I fell in love with the people on the other side of the table in those conversations. And that's what led me from my big company experience to start chasing opportunities in venture capital. I wanted to go solve big problems.
No, no, great. Absolutely. So tell us then, with ELO Life Systems and the challenges, tell us about the company and specifically around the challenges it solves.
Yeah, that's actually perfect. It always starts with what's the problem we're solving, right? What's that big unmet need that we're going after? Because there's a lot of cool things we can do with science, but ultimately we need to be solving problems people want solved. And that's where it starts for us. Our food needs to be healthier. Our food needs to be better for the planet as well, especially with all of the issues we're seeing with climate change. We see a tremendous harm being caused by food with the chronic diseases and the cost to society that poor nutrition is causing today. I don't even need to convince you of that, right? Everybody's pretty well aware of our diets aren't supporting a healthy lifestyle for the most part. We need to be better at that. The food companies, the beverage companies, the ingredient companies, they need to fulfill that promise in a much better way to provide families with healthier foods and healthier options, but still make them delicious. still make it the kinds of things everybody wants and craves, but do it in a way that's better for you and better for the planet. And that's where L.O. fits in. We're coming in and using the power of nature to find those kinds of ingredients that we can put into foods that are going to make our foods delicious, but also healthier and better for the planet. That's a big problem. You know, our first product, we actually looking at, we started looking at where are the biggest issues, and what we came across was sugar. You know, we started looking at the societal costs, the health costs, the chronic diseases that are just mounting and just getting worse and worse in an age where technology should be making our lives better. And that just didn't make any sense to me. So we actually started focusing on a sweetener that we can produce in plants. It's all natural. It comes from a plant, and we're finding a way now to produce it so that we can scale it up and make it more broadly available. And it's going to replace sugar. It's going to replace the artificial sweeteners in so many foods, thousands and thousands of foods. So the opportunity is huge for L.O. And in doing that, we can see a world where the impact is less diabetes, less obesity, because we're able to get the excess sugar out of people's diets.
I say it is a massive issue and problem, and it's like you're not going after something small, are you? Really, it's you know, you're going after something pretty chunky out there.
Yeah, if it was easy or small, someone else would do it. I try to find the areas where we can uniquely solve a problem. No one else can do what L.O. does in this space. Using plants as a biofactory, we can engineer the pathways to create these natural ingredients and get them produced at scale. And I focus on the problems where L.O. is the unique problem solver.
It sounds amazing. It really does. It sounds like it's a great mission, and I would imagine it's pretty unifying in terms of the people that work there and the, you know, the big prize, as it were. You know, and tell me, just with that in mind, if we were to look at where you are now and you were focusing on that, you know, what do you think you can achieve? You know, what's the real big goal here?
Yeah, what we ultimately want to see is a complete elimination of excess sugar in people's diets using our sweeteners. And we won't stop there. We see other opportunities with additional ingredients from plants that we can do the same thing with to help solve these kinds of problems, to provide healthier food and more sustainable production of that food. But it's an incredibly exciting moment for us. We imagine our products being on people's dinner tables, and that's what excites our employees, that mission and vision of we're creating something that's truly going to have impact in their home, on their own dinner table, on their neighbor's dinner table. They can explain to their neighbors exactly what we're doing and how it's going to change their lives for the better. And that's the magic behind our mission, is that feeling that we're really doing something good for everyone around us.
Amazing. It sounds it sounds fantastic. And tell me a little bit about you know, where you are on the journey at this stage, you know, as it were. Like, and that actually, just before that question, when you think about this particular ingredient, you know, it's rare, it's in plants. Can you tell us a little bit more about where it is and what the challenges are in, say, producing that, you know, just directly from the plant, as it were?
Yeah, as I mentioned, L.O. is really powered by nature and using solutions that are already out in nature to find interesting, valuable, healthy ingredients that we just need to make more of. And there's a lot of these things where you can't get enough of it from natural sources. It's hard to get to access, to grow. You don't want to deforest the Amazon because you want some rare exotic ingredient. And we have to do things in more sustainable ways. That's what technology can give us. And so this sweetener that we've got was inspired by a wonderful sweetener everybody loves coming out of China in monk fruit. But the monk fruit areas are really remote. You can't grow this fruit anywhere else in the world. And you have to hand pollinate every flower. So there's a massive amount of labor involved. And then when you harvest it, it starts to spoil immediately. So you can't really store it. It has to be processed in these Chinese factories almost immediately after it's picked. And as a result, it's incredibly expensive. The supply is totally unreliable, and there's all sorts of issues with its production in terms of taste. But when you talk to food companies, they want more of it. They can't get enough, and they can't use it because it's so expensive. So we figured out a way to say, okay, well, how do we overcome those pain points that the industry is experiencing, put it into a crop that we can actually produce the exact same sweetener in, but we can grow it right here locally in ways that are more sustainable. And that brings the price way down, that makes the supply reliable, and it opens up the scale to provide it for tens of thousands of foods and beverages that can now use this natural, delicious plant sweetener in all sorts of new applications that today you just can't use it.
Sounds amazing. So essentially you're using like it's like a gene editing platform essentially, right? So you knock out, am I right in thinking you're knocking out a couple of genes? I'm making it sound really simple, aren't I? But maybe tell us a little bit more about that part.
Yeah, we use the plants like a factory, a biofactory, right? So some of the parts you need for your factory are in the plant, and we have developed a lot of expertise understanding which plants have which capabilities in terms of the pieces in the factory that are already there. And then sometimes you need to add some pieces to be able to produce the ingredient. So if you really use that factory analogy, we're looking at the ways to make that factory, that natural biofactory, run as efficiently as possible to produce as much of the ingredient as we can, and then using sunlight and water and the natural process of photosynthesis for the plant to produce the ingredient. And what we're able to then harvest and extract from those plants provides us a plentiful supply of those really valuable ingredients.
Amazing. So when will we see, I mean, it's always the challenge with the food industry and the regulatory pathways and the adoption and, how long will it be before we're in the market seeing this product in different applications?
Well, the great news for us is this ingredient has been through the regulatory process with the FDA and others around the world. It's something that's been in everyone's diets for hundreds of years, actually, and especially in China. And so we already see a really great path for our regulatory process to get the status we need so it can be used in foods. We just have to link to what's already there. But biology does take time, and the synthetic biology takes time. So our mission over these next 3 years is get the synthetic biology nailed. Let's get the supply chain figured out, get the farmers working with us, the processors. We're in the midst of doing all of that now. And then the processing of the ingredients so that it's available. And then you get it out to the big beverage companies, the food companies, and they need a little bit of time now to just start putting it into the foods and the formulations. So there's a 2 to 3 year process for us that we have a lot of work ahead of us to accomplish.
Sounds really exciting. And from an application viewpoint, where does it fit the best? Where's the best fit?
Yeah, anywhere you need to get rid of sugar is where we're going to play. And not just with this first product, but we have several others in our pipeline coming behind it that are similar forms and offer some different kinds of options as sweeteners. But anywhere you want to reduce sugar in your diet, this sweetener, this natural plant-based sweetener, is a delicious alternative. And that's what we expect. So you've seen what stevia's done. There's a lot of different views on stevia and its taste. This one is much better tasting and is also plant-based and natural. So it can go into all sorts of interesting applications. A lot of work's being done at the big beverage houses, the Pepsis and the Coca-Colas, to find alternative sweeteners. Ingredient companies are working like crazy to find other solutions as well. It's just such a huge strategic movement. The governments are taxing sugary beverages and foods and putting laws in place that demand reduction. The medical community is getting louder and louder with more and more evidence that this is killing us and we have to make a change. And so we see tremendous movement across the food and beverage space towards sugar reduction. And that's where something like this just fits right in. And from our viewpoint, I don't think there's any single thing more impactful that we could do than come with some new natural solution that replaces sugar and still provides all that sweetness and deliciousness that consumers crave.
Incredible. Yeah, yeah. And is it I know some of the challenge with sugar replacements is it can sometimes be so sweet, you need such little of it to go into the product that you end up with trying to concern yourself with what else you should fill it with. And do you have the same problem with this in terms of if you're making, for instance, like a snack or like a confectionery chocolate bar, for instance, and you put your sugar into it?
Yeah, sugar plays different roles. That has the sweetness, but also the texture and some of the functionality, especially in baking. And so we will partner and have other sources of those types of ingredients that need to go together with the sweetener as a complete solution.
Yeah, yeah, great, absolutely. And so you're essentially, are you going to be going after the US market to start with? I mean, that sounds like a pretty good place to begin proceedings, right?
It is, and actually the US is one of the biggest markets for sugar, and also one of the biggest sources of problems in terms of chronic diseases. So it isn't a bad place to start. And then we see expansion around the world as we get our supply chain worked out and start looking at how we then launch the same kinds of products in other countries.
Oh, fantastic. No, it sounds like you're on the precipice of something very exciting and really impactful in terms of the ability to make the change. And how do you find, like, in terms of, I always hear about food companies taking so long with changes in ingredient formulations, and are you seeing that moving a bit quicker these days? Is there more urgency to try and actually make these changes?
Yeah, the food industry is getting democratized. It used to be you had to go through one of the big powerful food or beverage companies to get anything on a shelf. And the way technology works now, and it just has completely flattened. And you see all these edgy startup brands now just popping up out of garages practically, right? And taking up huge market share growth, very rapid growth, because they latch on to something that really connects with consumers. And the bigger companies who are a bit slower moving don't move fast enough to capitalize on that trend, and then have to go out and buy those companies in order to get the goodwill that's been built around that brand. And so we see a lot of changes in the industry that enable companies like us to feed into the system faster. Not everyone's going to move fast. There's still a lot of concern in the bigger places where they worry about cannibalization of their other products, and their brand reputation is very risk adverse. And so they're very cautious about anything new. But now more than ever, we see all these new companies who are trying to move fast. They're looking for edge and differentiation. And a company like L.O.A.M can provide them the ingredients they need to truly create something new.
Yeah, absolutely. Tell me, if you were able to wish for a particular change in the industry, something the industry could do, to help this path to be a little bit easier, as it were, adoption, the success of this kind of innovation, what would you wish for?
I wish for some of the bigger companies to truly find ways of working with external innovators. Right now, we run into those barriers where you go up to a big company and it's like the giant fortress in Lord of the Rings or something. You're kind of wondering, how am I going to get in there? And if I get in, am I ever going to get back out? So there's a real challenge between where we sit as edgy, fast-moving startups with real interesting innovation, and how we can tap the resources and the access to customers and the potential that's there for volume with some of these bigger players. How do you bridge that? And it's not well defined, and a lot of companies don't have a good answer. We're trying to create those connections, and we're looking for those partners who want to go with us early, be part of shaping this innovation, and looking for ways they can help accelerate it. And that's a real challenge. So if I could wish for one thing, it would be something that makes that connection point a lot easier and a lot more routine.
Yeah, yeah. And I'm wondering what that could be, because I see this a lot and I hear it a lot. And, you see innovation teams and groups set up for these companies. There seem to be a lot more set up to have the dialogue and discussion, whether it be trying to source or trying to partner on the journey, a lot more over the last 5 years than ever before. But there's still so many hurdles. And I'm wondering, like practically, how, is it an impossible task taking a really giant food company and getting them to move quickly?
Yeah, it can be, because you get in there and maybe the R&D team is very vision oriented, thinking 5 and 10 years out, and sees innovation coming that they need to embrace and help develop. But then behind them, they have all these brand managers that are trying to deal with what their sales are doing this quarter and wondering why they would change anything or take any risk at all that would potentially cause havoc in that business. And you can't, as the innovative company on the outside, we can't help them solve that. They have that internal dysfunction they have to manage. I think the answer is they need to set up more true autonomy in external innovation, where they have to almost separate a group out and not make them subject to anything else. They got to keep their hands off, let innovation happen with the right kind of partnerships, and live with the output of that, and not sit there and try to navigate all that complexity up front when you're just trying to get something off the ground. They need to create space and oxygen for it to breathe and have life. And then they can judge it and decide how it fits, but let's not stifle the innovation up front. Let's enable it.
Yeah, no, that's great. Tell me what other big hurdles and challenges, when you think about really where you want to get this business to in the next 5 years and where you are today, what else do you see as the really big hurdles to overcome?
It always comes back to the things I worry the most about. So the culture and building the right team. How are we doing in terms of our focus on the right milestones and maintaining that focus? The fundraising efforts, we're on a continual 2 and 3 year cycle for raising capital. And in this environment this year, especially, that's a challenging bit of work. And it's something that occupies a huge part of my time and takes me away from focusing on other parts of the business. But it's the one thing the CEO does have to spend the most time on. I worry a little bit about time to market. Some of the things we were just talking about, how do I get these products into the hands of these customers to make them into foods and beverages and accelerate that process rather than just doing it the way it's always been done. So we're looking at companies who are breaking down barriers and not seeing boundaries and walls around them that can do things differently as the right kind of partners for us, especially early. Because oxygen in startups, there's a leak in the room and the oxygen's always going out. We have to be moving fast. We can't just sit here and do things the way everyone's always done them and just take that methodical plodding approach. We have to find ways to accelerate it.
Yeah, I mean, interesting, isn't it? Because charting that original course, or that course which is going to get you there quicker, maybe the days of just going to the big 3 or 4 companies and it just doesn't work time-wise. But it's interesting, it's that kind of entrepreneurialism, that kind of problem solving, that kind of challenging the status quo, that really symbolizes the journey here, doesn't it? And probably the culture you're building as well.
It is. It's a big part of our culture. And those companies want to be innovative. They talk about it all the time. Like you mentioned, they have divisions and teams set up to do it, but they just get in their own way at times. And they need to truly change the structure and the philosophy to incentivize risk-taking. There's not an incentive in these places to take risk. It's the opposite. Whereas a startup is all about let's change the world. Let's do what we have to do to figure that out.
Yeah. So tell me, how do you go about then building a fantastic culture? Well, what are some tips you've got around doing that?
Well, the one thing I've learned is the as a CEO, I can't spend enough time on this. I think that I set things in motion, and then I realize, well, if I'm not working on this every week to build the culture and strengthen the culture, then it's lagging. And so that's been a lesson I've learned here pretty early, that in these CEO roles, I've got to spend more time on. I'm not an expert in this, so I can give you a few ways that I've found that have worked really well, and just admit that it's a work in progress as we find new ways to do things and continue to build ELO and strengthen its culture. But our teams are constantly changing and expanding. The functions are being added, the places where we're operating are expanding. Everything's always changing. And so at the foundation of it all, that culture is the only thing that you really have that's stable in a startup. There's just so much change all the time, and it impacts everybody. You feel that anxiousness as change is just constant. So I need that culture to sit there and just hold everybody and give them a firm footing. So what we've done at ELO is we started just by saying, hey, we're a new entity. We've spun out of a public company. We're standalone, VC backed. How do we want to define ourselves? And we engage the whole team in what is our mission and vision here at ELO? What are our values that are going to unify us as we live together here at work? And what culture do we want to develop from that? And then once we've defined it, then it becomes, okay, how do I exemplify it? How does my management team show these values and live these values every day? Because the culture is really just the output of living those values every single minute, every interaction with our customers, with our colleagues, with everything we do. And then the communication, how do I personalize these so that everyone understands how important they are to me, how they've affected my life, how they have changed what I do at work. I inject storytelling so that there's a connection to, it's not just words and slogans and things on screensavers and mouse pads. It's actually real life, and it's my family, and it's inside of me, and they understand how important this is. And then I invite them to join me on this journey and have the whole team engaged, and give them channels and resources where they can go and demonstrate these values as a team and as individuals, and also recognize their peers when they see all of this in action. And so we have a lot of programs that do that make sure that we're highlighting great examples of living the ELO values, and we're recognizing that every week, measuring the impact, and then ultimately adapting, because not everything works, right? I think I have a great idea, or our team comes up with something, and then we roll it out, and we've got a few barometers in our team that'll always let us know when something's falling flat. They don't hesitate to give us feedback. And so we're able to get that great feedback and then adapt our approach so it actually has the impact that we intended. And then every day of every week of every month of every year, we're pushing that culture forward, and it's continuing to kind of cement that foundation, but it is very much a work in progress.
Yeah, no, that's great. Thank you for that. I mean, it's so key and critical, isn't it? Success is gonna, the long-term success is going to be as a direct result of how successful you are in building the culture.
Yeah, and I took my eye off the ball once or twice in some of the roles I've had, thinking that everything was okay and I had put enough energy in motion, and then you start to see the wheels coming off the cart and wondering, why isn't this happening? Why aren't people doing this? Or why did this happen? And then you realize you just have to look in the mirror and point at yourself and say, well, that's because you, CEO, didn't stay focused on it. You didn't spend enough time, and you didn't show the organization how important this was. And so those are moments that I've had to go back and just call myself out and say, I'm going to do a better job, and admit to the organization, hey, I need to do more here. I realize I've let this fall a bit. So those have been learning experiences for me, and I keep it at the top of my list. I have a real short list of things that I always filter as like, here's the things you really ought to be focused on as the CEO, and culture's number one.
Well, I mean, it's interesting because it's back to the point we spoke about, the real life practical experience you've had with other companies, different environments, you've been on that journey. you know, it's a challenge if you're a first-time CEO, and it's a challenge if it's your first job as a founding CEO. That's sometimes, you know, the challenge the industry is faced with.
Yeah, and I was lucky to have mentors, and so at every stage of my career, I've had these influencers in my life, from high school biology teachers that opened me up to the power of DNA, to college professors that brought me into labs that I had no reason to be in, but they gave me an opportunity to do research, to, you know, later stage career advice from the VC community. And our investors in our company in L.O.A.M are tremendous. And the best piece of advice I ever got was, here's the 3 things that you have to be focused on as a CEO. If you're spending time on anything else, then you ought to have someone else, you know, taking on that work. And those 3 things were set the vision and strategy, build the right team and culture, and raise money. And I've added one 4th one, which is, if you run out of things to do, go raise money.
That's great. That's great advice. And L.O.A.M sounds like it'll be a great place to work at over the next few years. You know, the mission sounds great. Culture sounds like you're really working hard to develop it and grow it, and it sounds like it will be a fantastic company to work at.
We're really putting our shoulder to it. It's a lot of hard work, but when you have a unifying vision and your employees are really driven by success to achieve that vision, you can do anything. And, you know, we imagine someday our ingredients in foods on people's tables in the next few years, and that really motivates us. We love talking about what we're doing and how it's going to help people in the world to reduce chronic diseases and make the world a better place.
Yeah, amazing. On that note, thank you so much. I could talk to you for hours about this, but I know you've got to get back to building the culture, right? So,
well, Simon, next time I'll interview you. I'd love to learn more about your journey, but this has been tremendous, and I appreciate you taking the time to explore this with me. Thank you very much.
No, thank you very much, and best of luck with everything.